Our next panel discussion, and before lunch, our last one, will be on inclusive futures. So we're moving into the future of futures. I'm going to ask Tom Fleming, the moderator of the panel, to come over and introduce in detail his speakers, so I won't have to repeat everything. And Bartosz Frąckowiak, I'm sorry, Bartosz. Epaminondas Christophilopoulos, over here. And Elena Mavromichali.
Maybe go in the middle. And then
Is over there. And Tom, will you introduce your panelists? Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you go on that side.
No.
Go here. How are we all doing? Are we okay? Feeling positive? Inspired? Uncertain? Because we're going to be talking about the future. And when I was younger, talking about the future was very exciting and compelling. And maybe the consensus is that it's less so these days. But we're going to try and big up the future as well, I think, in this session. Because we have to be brave, we have to be positive, and we have to find solutions. So this is, there are two heavy words packed together for this session: inclusive futures. So the word inclusive is one of those hugely challenging words that we all face every day in the cultural sector. We've moved from a past, perhaps, when we had this burden of representation, the impossibility of representing everybody who was out there, and now we have this crisis of inclusion. And how can we possibly be inclusive when we know we're not? When we know that we have our own unconscious biases as well as our institutional rigidities and challenges? How can we, in a context of culture wars, of digital transformation, of hyperdiversity, of constant shifts, how can we be inclusive? And how can we, therefore, create a future or futures which are genuinely inclusive? I'm not going to put pressure on our panelists to answer those questions as such, but I know that they have lots of ideas and perspectives which I think can help us to wayfind as a cultural sector in terms of generating, co-creating inclusive futures. We have three speakers who come from different, but I think quite aligned perspectives or backgrounds. Elena is the strategic advisor to the Office of the Prime Minister, an advisor to the Special Secretariat of Foresight, Hellenic Republic. So we have a policy maker, a policy innovator here, and obviously we follow policy triggers so much in the cultural sector, as well as we like to think that we can also influence and shape policy. We have Bartosz, who from Poland is a Foresight consultant, art curator at Foresight, the Futures Literacy company in Poland. And I know we're going to hear about future literacy and kind of unlearning and relearning to be able to shape the future as part of this session. And last, but of course not least, we have now everybody's name is really complex here, and this is making inclusion really challenging. Epaminondas, and that's before I get to your surname, which I won't even try. All I need to say is that you are president of MOMus, and everybody probably knows who MOMus is, or what MOMus is, and also UNESCO Chair on Futures Research. It'll be really interesting to hear what that involves as well. So how, if we turn to you first of all, Elena, how can we, conceive of a future, an inclusive future, when we're so afraid?
Well, that's a very good point, Tom. We're actually afraid of the future because sometimes, when we think about it, it's obvious that many of us are not going to be part of this future. Sometimes it's too distant, and it's not very easy for us to imagine. So we need to address futures illiteracy, which means that we must invest in futures literacy education and foresight capability. So encouraging participatory workshops like UNESCO's Futures Literacy Laboratories can help individuals challenge assumptions and explore diverse scenarios. So integrating foresight practices into policy development, education systems, and culture institutions, such as museums, can foster a mindset shift, empowering communities to shape their collective future with confidence and creativity. And I would like to refer to the person that has first written a book around transforming the future, which is Riel Miller. He's a scholar, and he's one of the most important figures in UNESCO that has created these laboratories for the future. And he said that the imagination of the future influences and impacts the perception in the present, since the later than now does not exist. It can only be imagined. So I believe that we are starting from that point.
Thank you, Elena. Now, futures literacy, what does that mean in practice?
Yeah, the futures literacy is a kind of competence that we can develop, we can train. Imagination is one aspect, but we also have in foresight. Foresight is like a strategic foresight. Is a bunch of methods to try to analyze and try to understand different possible or hypothetical futures. So it's not a way of forecasting future. No, it's not about owning future. It's more about like seeing different possibilities in the future. And it's part of futures literacy. And my idea about futures literacy and foresight, also in relation to trust, is that we can use futures as a tool. We can use so-called futures cultures also, so some kind of organizational cultures that are oriented towards futures, to deal with cultural wars, to deal with fear and to deal with this resistance that was also discussed during first talk today. So we can try to unblock our imagination that is now overwhelmed with dystopian visions of the future, that is overwhelmed with catastrophic visions of the future. We can try to unblock it and try to imagine collectively together in a very inclusive and participatory, real participatory process, different futures. And these different futures is also like an invitation to discuss our current needs, our values, but also to address strengths that we have in our institutions, but also in our society or communities. What strengths do we have to address certain challenges that may appear in different futures? So I would say that this futures literacy can be maybe not ideal, but it can be a good tool to deal with cultural wars, with fear, and also a way of nurturing trust in institutions and museums.
Excellent, thank you. And the last word there, museums, I think, obviously this is a conference broadly about museums, although more widely across the cultural sector. And this places an interesting opportunity, I suppose, or responsibility more so for museums in terms of how they can help to build that futures literacy, how to navigate into a more inclusive future, whilst also obviously museums have been grappling with their past, and that puts them at a really vital crossroads, I suppose, in terms of how we can imagine a more positive future while we get clean about what actually happened historically. Now, we're putting two hats on at once, if I may dress you as such, thinking from a global perspective in terms of your work at UNESCO, but also at an institutional perspective in Greece. How can the cultural sector be this kind of catalyst or this vector for a more inclusive future?
Thank you, Tom, and try to be as clear as I can. I mean, the field of futures or the field of foresight or how we can describe it doesn't matter really, has long been collaborated with the field of arts, actually. I mean, we do understand in our field that art and culture plays an important role, not only how reflects the society, but how we can use culture and arts to actually shape society and shape the future. So this is something that is very clear also in academic level in our field. Now, being in a museum, it's really important because we have this tool. So you can use this tool, but you need to know how to use this tool, how you can use the museum as a platform to promote and to act towards an inclusive future. And for this, you need to take several actions. You need to, I mean, if I can reflect in the first keynote speech, we have talked and we heard about the polarization in the US society. I believe the same we experienced in Greece and in other countries, in Poland, for example. Museums and Foresight offer exactly specific method, specific tools, how you can create a discussion towards a common future, how you can find consensus, and how you can include different views about the present, but also about the future, and help the society move ahead in a more inclusive way, and how you can promote trust to the institution. So, yeah, and I can later on give you some practical examples.
While you've got the mic there, because just to push this a little bit more critically, hasn't the museum sector historically failed in delivering on that, in terms of being genuinely inclusive, in terms of coming to terms with history to shape the future? How can we sort of learn from, but also unlearn from the practice that has gone before us to innovate and reform the way that museums can play a role in the future?
Well, I mean, we can definitely see past examples, but then we can always keep in our mind that the society is changing, is evolving, the world is changing. We cannot always use the same tools that we used in the past, but we can take example of previous cases. We can refer to previous cases, how museums were catalysts especially in local change, how museums have transformed the future of neighborhoods, how museums have transformed the future of cities. We know many examples that cities and how their future has changed because of a new contemporary museum. So these are things we can discuss, but I will be happy to share some more practical examples.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, just coming all the way back along the line to Elena, there is then lots of good practice. There is a kind of evidence, a resource in terms of the way that museums have had that impact. And there is this kind of compulsion for the cultural sector, including museums, to generate data in terms of evidencing impact. But I know you've got some reflections more broadly on how we can generate data to influence the future as well.
Well, I think we are so much obsessed with data and metrics. I understand that that's one of the ways to attract also proper investment. But we need to provide to museums and cultural managers the right tools in order to do a proper job. I believe in our examples with Epaminondas, with 3 specific futures literacy workshops, we managed to run the last 3-4 years, proven that when you are designing these workshops, you are reflecting on the absolute challenges in museums. So with UNESCO experts and our small team, we have designed and implemented 3 pilot futures laboratories exploring the future of 3 different challenges and ecosystems and 3 different museums. So we hosted this series of impactful events, including an online laboratory with international participants in December 2021, and then followed by in-person sessions in Athens in July 2022 at the National Gallery, and another one in Thessaloniki in early 2023. These initiatives demonstrate a consistent commitment to fostering cross-cultural dialogue and collaboration, like contributing to building trust and cultivating inclusive futures. And these laboratories of ideas aimed at reimagining the future of museums. The initiative sought to harness futures literacy and foresight to drive museums' development and modernization, engaging in total more than 80 key stakeholders. including government officials, professionals in the cultural sector, architects, urban planners, educations, and local community members. By all means, that we are trying with these laboratories, and I believe that Epaminondas agrees, if we manage also, because these are pilot projects, if we manage to scale them up to facilitate museum professionals as well as community, other community members to understand and figure out what kind of tools they can use in order to define this impact and communicate the impact of the museums.
Excellent. So there's this opportunity then to go beyond pilot stage to mainstream and embed
Exactly.
the notion of a lab within, or the museum as a lab itself, or the museum sector as a lab in future foresighting, which seems to me to be, that seems quite exciting. That's a reason to be positive.
We have
about the
to
future.
trust the impact of the cultural sector, and that is something very, very important. We have to trust culture, and we have to value culture as one of the important catalysts for our societies and for social cohesion.
Now, on that, because I totally agree with you, but we all know that culture is contested, isn't it? And we know that we're in this kind of age of sort of cultural dissonance, and there's so much complexity, there's censorship, there's self-censorship, there's contestation at every point. And in that context, and we were talking earlier in the Polish context, it's very difficult for institutions to navigate and to find that if it's the high ground or is it the undergrowth, I don't know. But to be able to be that trusted, that safe space, that connecting space to shape the future.
Yeah, so first I think it's important to say that when thinking about trust and inclusivity, as you said at the beginning, we need to address precisely with whom we are going to build this trust. And building trust is a permanent, constant process. It's not that we have trust or like lack trust, but it's a continuity, and it's not a linear process. And sometimes we gain trust through conflict, not necessarily consensus. And I'm saying that because I think museums and art institutions are related to power dynamics, and we cannot, we cannot not to address that. And on one hand, I would like to say about some acts of solidarity that created trust, for instance, between institutions and refugees from Ukraine and Poland, because we experienced in the first days of war that some museums and art institutions were transformed in one night into temporary shelters and reception points. For instance, institution which I was deputy director Biennale Warszawa, which was a municipal institution at that time, we just transformed the whole space, the venue, into reception point. And that's something that was completely unexpected for us, that the institution has changed in function, but in a very rapid way. And I'm saying about that because we specifically created a safe space for Black indigenous people of color coming from Ukraine that were not recognized by Polish shelters as Ukrainians, even though some of them or most of them had Ukrainian nationalities. So it was like when speaking about inclusivity, and it's absolutely important to say that we need safe spaces and refuge in the institutions for marginalized communities, and to continue this, and also to relate it to the current situation, and specifically, for instance, to the speech given by Nan Goldin in the Neue National Gallery in Berlin last week, a few days ago, in which she addressed the problematic aspect of mostly German institutions and Western institutions, in which artists and curators were cancelled because of supporting Palestinian case and because of their involvement in BDS movement, so boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and how people are censored, how people are cancelled in institutions, how people are coerced to sign some statements. So it's something that we cannot not to address today when speaking about institutions and trust, that we are now facing very serious problems of censorship and you know, suppressing freedom of speech and freedom of artistic expression in the middle, in the center of the West.
Yeah, and I just drawing the dots a little there as well, because obviously we're in this context where this is an extremely hot topic, and that wrapped up in this is this absolute dilemma for institutions in terms of where they position themselves, considering who their communities are, who their funders are, but also there's this element of kind of policy coercion or populist coercion which happens as well in the cultural sector. But drawing this back down to the communities that museums work with here, and thinking about MOMus and, you know, working with the contemporary arts, with artists, and artists are often positioned as these able to look around the corner, be able to critically engage with the present to shape the future. How can, in that context, in the one that's one scenario we've just heard, how can a museum provide that safe, trusted, stable environment for a diversity of cultural expressions to come to the fore without being seen to favor one or the other, to censor or to self-censor?
Yeah, amazing. I mean, so far we haven't, at least I haven't felt any kind of political pressure in our work in MOMus, but let me give you two examples that I was personally involved, related with how museums and futures can really have a real impact on this kind of topic that we are discussing. So the first one is related with the city of Malaga and the Picasso Museum there. The other is related with MOMus. So the first one, excuse me, was related with how a museum, so it was the Picasso Museum in Malaga, one of the best museums, maybe the best museum in the city, with, I don't know, maybe 1 million visitors per year. So they used their role as a trusted institution in the city, and they organized a workshop. I was invited to curate this workshop together with other colleagues from UNESCO, and the focus was not related with the museum, was not related at all. It was related with the future of the city of Malaga. And the museum played that role, take that initiative, invited stakeholders from the city, and we ran this masterclass the first day, and the second day, this workshop to imagine the future of Malaga. So it was how the museum used this role to initiate this kind of discussion. The second one, it was an initiative we took in MOMus 1 year ago, and it was related with how we can work with artists. So I'm going back to your comment. So in that case, we invited 40 young artists, and the first day we sat down, we ran a one-day workshop with the artists together with our museum staff, and we tried to imagine global futures. So we imagined what will happen by 2050. It was an open but very structured way to imagine the future. We constructed scenarios, and then for a week, the artists created their own artworks related with this topic. And then we curated an exhibition that was there for like a period of 6-7 months. We saw different kind of items. We saw things related with climate crisis, things related with the digital evolution and the challenges that creates. We saw different kind of aspects, different approaches. And the exhibition afterwards became a platform for discussions. School visited the museum, and that was also an initiative for educational programs. And this is another example of how the museum can open this kind of discussion in a safe, trusted environment, and how we can use the museum as a tool not to only reflect the society, but help the society also imagine and shape the future.
Excellent. And just thinking about this on a policy level then, perhaps in a Greek context, but I know you can talk more widely than a Greek context. So there is that understanding of museums as this safe space, this public space, this kind of agora where diversity can converge. And there is, as we heard from Susie earlier on, there's still this kind of broadly a consensus around neutrality and a level of trust, although there's a danger or risk of that splintering in quite dangerous ways. In a Greek context, is there in the policy language, are museums being put into the center of the conversation, or how do we get them into the center of the conversation around how they can play that positive convening role to shape a positive, inclusive future?
Well, it's very challenging, even for people working in governments, to place museums in the center of the conversation. So it's not like the language is completely understood, because the competition is quite large, as you can imagine. But museums should be in the center of the conversation. And most importantly, I believe that we should advocate more about museums of contemporary culture. And that is something that should be in the epicenter at the moment in terms of funding, in terms of challenges in collecting and monitoring and analyzing information. So this is something also this is also a personal view. I believe that we need a lot of work, and we need to facilitate also to direct the right investment towards contemporary museums, because they prove that they are working towards this direction of including more broader audiences and enabling provocative dialogue around very important subjects. And I am sure that many of you are going to be visiting the Museum for Contemporary Culture in Athens, which is setting an example and has recently launched an online magazine, which I find very interesting for you to check out, which is called Octopus. And they're also broadening the thematics beyond, the obvious and the regular, let's say, subjects that we are acquainted to see in museums. So I believe we are in the right direction, and we should do also our work to be more consistent, more, not being disappointed if we don't have sufficient funding and sufficient support to arts in general, and our voices at the end are going to be heard, because culture should be in the epicenter.
Yeah, and it goes back to your point earlier about data and how, I don't need that one, but
Sorry.
how
You understand how comfortable I am when I speak in the audience.
But museums are this kind of reservoir of data and knowledge. And the more interactive that data becomes, the more value that is in terms of informing other approaches to public policy. And that it's a bit of a cliche about that innovation ecosystem stuff where museums can play a role. And I know this is a kind of heart of what you've been focusing on in Poland is around how to embed the museums and the wider cultural sector in future foresighting. I just want to, if we can kind of go along the, well, I was going to ask, you can keep the mic, please. It's okay. Just let's get practical. Maybe just kind of pick from the orchard of ideas one or two really interesting examples from the work that you've been doing that perhaps can be illustrative of how museums can play a more progressive role in inclusive futures. And then I hope we've got time just to kind of open it up for about 5 minutes before lunch. Yeah? I've got no idea what time it is. We've got 5 minutes. Okay. So just very, very quick little examples, and then we'll have a couple of killer questions or observations.
Yeah, so just I'll give one short example, a convention of women farmers. The artwork created by Marwa Arsanios, Lebanese artist, so we presented it during the first edition of Biennale Warszawa. It was considered as an artwork, but it was a kind of convention. We invited women, representatives of eco-feminist collectives from different places around the world, from Colombia, Mexico, from Rojava, from Bekaa Valley, from Greece, from Germany, from Great Britain, of different origins, to come to Warsaw to have a convention around eco-feminist practices. So women, for instance, they brought seeds. Some of them smuggled those seeds to European Union because, as you know, it's prohibited to smuggle seeds, to bring seeds. And they discussed like possibilities of creating some translocal cooperations between their collectives. They discussed gender-related violence. They discussed land grab in different contexts in relation to agriculture, for instance. So it was interesting to see how very different situations in different geographical and cultural and political contexts, how suddenly they started, to be very close to each other, and how they started to realize how much they share and how much they have in common. And it was like a convention was part of public program of the art institution.
Great, thank you. So that's I guess what policymakers would call intercultural dialogue, but you can't have an inclusive future without brokering intercultural dialogue around these kinds of topics. Please. An example?
I thought I already shared two examples.
That's all right, you don't need to give any more, that's fine. We have a room full of...
I can share more, but I think it's, maybe we have more time to discuss.
Let us then, if we have just one or two questions, or maybe online, or...
I think we should take a break. I'm being... No, I mean, in the name of being strict, as I said, for today, and since it's time for a lunch break, we'll have plenty of time to discuss during our networking events after 6:30, so anyone can approach the speakers and ask their questions. And even now, I mean, you can just grab them as they way down, so thank you very much. And we will be back for Moncho Lopez at 3:30, the latest, okay?